Hey friends, welcome back to the Invitation Podcast. Kyle here.
Phil here.
And we're jumping into Season 2, Episode 5. And we've got so much content here that I had to break it down to Phil with all of his points that it just wasn't going to fit into this episode. Right? And we like to pack in the value, but it would have just been unreasonable here. So there's going to be some invitations, don't worry. But some of these things actually are going to really set the stage for really six episodes on Moses. We're excited. I'm quickly going to hand the reins over to Phil. Let's get into it.
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. The exciting part about this for me is it relates back to my days in campus ministry on campus. I originally talked through these sort of core ideas in the character of Moses on a college campus. But speaking of college campus, whenever we're talking about burning bushes and hearing voices and seeing things, whether it's college students or maybe your time in Colorado, that could lead to conversations about onerous and maybe even illegal behavior, depending where you live.
I was waiting for the Colorado jokes, but these strike near and dear to me from my resident assistant days.
Oh, those two, yes. So we're not going to go that route, and neither is Moses, but it does stem back to time in college.
Stem back? Ministry. I see what you did there.
Oh, gosh. Yes, I did not try that one though. But there's so much to be said here that you're right. The thought of trying to cram it into one episode and get into all the different invitations that are being made.
It would have been an hour and a half, and it would have been a whirlwind.
Yes, and it would have been way too many invitations to actually process and apply.
Right.
And but that just makes me all the more excited to slow down.
Yeah.
And you're right. Take a picture here at the beginning of Exodus 3.
Yeah.
And see what is being set up here. And then after today's episode, we'll have 5 episodes really digging into our character and our identity before God.
Yeah. This is the foundational stuff. And so just like anything else that you're building, when it's done correctly, you'll see the majority of the time gets spent on the foundation. And then, folks are like, oh, the house went up, right? And the same thing applies here. This is the type of character, identity, foundational pieces that it does make sense to slow down a bit and dig in, ask the questions, do self-reflection, spend that time with the Father looking at these things in your life, because these are the things that are not only going to allow that house to be built up to new heights, but these are the types of things that are going to change the future and what that house you're building is going to look like at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And as Christians, and even on this podcast, we don't spend a lot of time harkening back to Jewish roots. There's a lot of inferences for sure in my learning and in my teaching around that. But if you're familiar with Judaism and the Old Testament, it so often comes back to Moses. So even for that sense of where we're going in the arc of this podcast, it does make sense to slow down. And we're only slowing down a little bit for the amount of time we could spend on Moses and all the different stories.
Well, and just a note, depending on when you're listening to this, a note of cultural events. Don't tie this to what's going on currently in the news with Israel, just because there's a lot of geopolitical things that are involved there. So, don't think that we're glossing over that, but what we're focusing on here is very different from what you're potentially seeing in the nightly news.
That's a good word, because even just the word or term Israel has a lot of different meanings in this cultural moment.
Absolutely.
But for us, in this moment here on this podcast, we're going to look at Exodus 3. And as always, you're welcome. If you're listening or watching and you've got a Bible or a Bible app you want to open, you can do that. But if you're just listening, it's perfectly fine to listen along. Kyle, I'm going to do the reading today, which is going to require the glasses for the tiny Bible. Here, so I'll spare you.
Tiny text Bible.
Spare you the Irish strain on that and give it to myself. And we're going to walk through verses 1 through 6 at least here and go on to a couple verses. But we're going to be doing a little back and forth on commentary questions to dig into a little bit of this setup here. So with that, Exodus 3, starting in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So Moses, he's a shepherd, but he's also a fugitive, right? And when the part of the amazing part of the story of Moses that we're skipping over is his birth narrative and being spared by, Pharaoh's war path against toddlers and then his upbringing. There's gosh, we could have stopped there too, but anyway, and then his upbringing, and then Moses murders a man, and he flees, and so we're kind of skipping all of that, but now we find him as a shepherd fugitive at this mysterious mountain. Verse 2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Kyle, we'll stop here first. We didn't get very far, but we've got fire and a bush. So we've got this tree-ish figure. We've got fire. Is this ringing any bells? Any biblical bells of anything we've covered before?
Trees and fire.
Yeah.
No, should it?
Let's think about this. So we've got this bush. It's on fire. What does fire normally do to a bush tree?
Consumes it.
Yeah, right.
Burns it up.
But this one, it's not.
Yeah.
So this tree has an abundance of life to it, you could say.
Yeah.
It's not dying, so it's this tree of life. Moment. And the last time we left that tree of life, it was being guarded by this mysterious angel with swords of
fire.
Yes. And the last time someone got near to this tree being guarded by fire, Cain murdered Abel. So we've got this bush that seemingly has this abundance of life.
Right.
We've got this fire protecting it.
Yep.
And Moses, though, interestingly enough, he's curious about it.
Yeah.
Right?
I like this guy.
Yeah, he's curious about it. And I want to make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Okay, yeah, so verse 3. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. So, let's see here. Let me follow my notes here. I'm going to keep reading. So, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at God. All right, so I've thrown a little tree of life, Garden of Eden stuff at you, Cain and Abel even. What else stands out to you?
Some shame, some hiding. That goes back to the garden.
Good call.
For sure.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Good.
There's a pursuing again of God looking, for his people.
Let's pause on that one because I think there's a brilliant interplay here. So Moses is just working.
Yeah.
He's working his day job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Who knows what he's pondering, what he's thinking, what's going on in his mind. But one thing that does go on his mind is, there's a bush on fire. It's not burning up, and bushes catching on fire in the wilderness in this area isn't actually all that uncommon. I mean, it's not like every day there's a bush on fire and someone's putting it out, but lightning strikes or a particularly dry period. It's not too uncommon, but for a bush to not burn up is. And what we have is Moses just doing his day job and God lights this bush on fire. So that's kind of God initiating. Right. But then Moses gets curious, ponders it, and then acts on that pondering.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, there's a lot right there. But how many times do we overthink stuff And then we think we've done something righteous. We think we've done something godly by saying, oh yeah, I should love the poor. And all of a sudden we think good of ourselves, right?
I thought of loving the poor. I thought of feeding the homeless.
I should be more patient with my children. Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, God.
Yeah.
And then we're just as impatient with our children.
Wow.
And so not only is Moses being pursued by God, Moses recognizes something of that, but acts even on what little he has, and then God pursues again. Moses. I think you already have Moses' attention, God.
Right.
You already have his attention, but look how God continues to grab his attention and so there's this, hopefully you, the listener, are hearing and seeing this. There's this interplay of attention grabbing. Oh, you've got my attention a little bit here, so I'm going to actually give you my attention. Oh, I'm going to get more of your attention.
Yep.
And then Moses, hides his face, is told to take his sandals off, is told to engage more. There's this escalating, mounting engagement from both sides.
Right.
On this mountain that's escalating at the same time, this mountain of Horeb. You sitting on something there before I go on?
A lot, but no, please go on.
Okay. So, the first invitation is centered around this. We're going to have two invitations, but this first invitation is turning aside.
Yeah.
The invitation to turn aside, not necessarily from what we're doing, right? I think it's interesting that Moses is in the setting of just doing his day job.
Yeah.
Right? But in the midst of his day job, and our day jobs, and our parenting, right? And everything else that we do we have a readiness to turn aside?
Right.
In our thought life, important, I didn't mean to demean it earlier. In our thought and prayer life, do we have the ability to turn aside?
Right.
In our actions, do we have the ability to stop what we're doing and physically turn aside?
Yeah.
And a readiness for that, so that we might take the little bit of God that has been revealed and see if there's more of God to be revealed.
Yeah. What are we missing by going through the paces, by numbing our senses, by even before we get to actions, what have we done in our mind to close off our creativity, our attention paying, right? And that here's where I need to contain myself, because I could go for hours on this stuff, but how are we controlling our energy resources as far as what we're paying attention to, and how might we need to redistribute that so that in Moses' case he was able to see this and to turn aside and, like Phil said, actually act on that and pursue what caught his eye.
Yeah, and at some point, Kyle, we should turn the camera and the mic on you and some of those radical attention-paying thoughts and give the listener that. And we plan on doing that at some point.
Invitation for another day.
Yes, and it ties in really well to this, so maybe we'll have to bookmark this lesson to integrate there. But you're right, and I have experienced this in mystical ways.
Okay.
And at some point I will share, hearing the voice of God during my freshman year, and how that was a wild experience. I was going to say transforming experience, but it actually took 2 years to transform from that, which is part of the point. I didn't turn aside more fully than what was called for in that moment, so it took me a while to turn aside. Sometimes, there was one time a week or so ago, I saw a blue jay, and we're recording this in December 1st, right? Yeah. So this was mid-November. I was like, a blue jay in mid-November, and then 10 minutes later I saw another blue jay, and I was like, God, what are you doing here? There's got to be something here. And so just that posture, I don't even want to tell you, the listener, what I got from that, because I want to leave you with the curiosity of turning aside.
Well, and look, not that everything has to mean something, but at the same time, if we're paying attention, the Lord's going to speak to us, right? I'm a car guy. The Lord spoke to me in a very special way. Actually, come to find out, getting a $1,000 van from my grandma. And I'm a car guy. What am I doing with a van? But it's helpful for our family, right? We need it. And plus it helps me keep more fun cars in the garage. But and aside, right? So
Yes.
so for me, the Lord's,
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted a G-Wagon. If you're familiar with those big boxy, twin turbo
Yes.
V8 with the side pipes, right? The Geländewagen, if you will, for my German friends, right? But here's the thing. I was joking with a friend, and I said, and it just kind of came to me. I was like, well, look, I got this thing for $1,000 for a G. I guess I got my G-Wagon, right? And of course I didn't, but in that moment, because I was paying attention,
Yeah, good.
the Lord said to me, like, look, I care about you, and don't forget that in that caring, I care about what you want, right? Keep dreaming those dreams, and in the meantime, don't miss my provision. And because I was paying attention, because Phil was paying attention with his Blue Jay story, these are the types of things that we're talking about. And you're not that you need to tie meaning to everything, but those times that you are being spoken to in rich relationship from your Father in a way that you're going to receive it on a deep level. Those things aren't possible unless you're paying attention, unless you're turning towards His goodness and looking for His heart as you're interacting with the world around you.
Yeah, you're a workout guy, and one of my other friends, Ted, shout out to Ted, he's a workout guy, and one of the things that Ted often says is, I work out for the matters that mean the most when I need that strength.
Yeah.
When I need that ability, whether it's carrying a kid on my back through the park when they're tired, whether it's helping a friend move.
Yep.
But he works out every day, even though those days come up a handful of times through the year.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with this invitation to turn aside. Like, those Blue Jays, they might not have mattered at all, but the practice of turning aside, when two Blue Jays in the middle of fall show up when they're not supposed to, that's good enough, because I'm creating a posture that says, if God's going to reveal himself a little bit, I'm going to engage with that in case he reveals himself a lot. Because I don't want to miss this burning bush moment. I don't want to miss that moment where he does provide, but I haven't turned aside to engage more deeply on the level required to receive what he wants to give me in those moments. And man, the mystery of that alone should so compel us to practice this all the time. This actually happened in my heart earlier this morning. My oldest daughter has this habit right now of getting anxious right before falling asleep. And Lindsay and I were at the end of ourselves last night. We're like, we've tried so many different things. And I was like, Lord, what is it that you're doing? What am I missing? Right? I had that moment this morning of, okay, there's probably this burning bush somewhere in the midst of all this. And instead of looking at the burning bush, I've been just doing my day job. I went right back to all the tricks and habits and meditations and, all the things that I know has worked for me and probably should work for a 9-year-old if I could just, Lord, I haven't turned aside just to see what you are doing, what you are revealing here, and was convicted of that this morning. So we practice this so that, not so we can have our genie in the bottle moments when we need it. I don't want that to come that way, but just for whenever God does show up in big or small ways, we have a readiness to be there and match his level of engagement.
Well, there's a richness of life that comes when you're following along on this journey, and to your point, Phil, it's easy to miss.
I would even say this is life. Life really is the ability to stay connected to the root. John, the Gospel of John will put it, right? Are the branches that remain connected. This turning aside and this posture. So not only the act of it, but the posture. I want you, the listener, to see this as a marriage between the two. It is the internal turning aside. It's also the active bodily time task of turning aside that connects us with God's divine life itself. Even, as Paul would put it, resurrection life. On this side of our own death. And that's an incredible offer on God's part, and which we'll bring it back to the story, which makes this even more impressive on Moses' part. I'm going to take this curiosity, acknowledge it, and act on it. He does both. And with that, let's see what happens here. So, Verse 7. So, actually, I'll backtrack a little bit so we can regain our ground here. No pun intended on the holy ground. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. And so Moses, in this moment, is like, yeah, that's what caused me to murder a guy in the first place. Is like there's this oppression between the Egyptians and the Hebrews, and he got caught up in the tension of being raised Egyptian, even though he was ethnically a Hebrew.
Right.
And so, he got caught up in that tension and murdered a guy. And so the Lord sees this, and Moses is probably in this moment of like, yeah, like I can almost see
his
Moses,
sense of justice has now been ignited.
yes, and
right?
passion of like, I'm here shepherding these stinking sheep, and I want to be there, right? Yeah. But I murdered a guy and I'm a fugitive. But like that passion doesn't just go away, right? And okay, all right. So he's barefoot and he's bowed before God, but I kind of sense this like awakening of like, oh, he sees what I see. Okay, verse 8. So, this is still God speaking. So, I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, he's pumped.
Yeah, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. Yeah, that desert land, we've been relying on this river to flood, and then it's right back to desert. Yeah, let's get something that's actually like spacious, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then it says the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. We're going to skip over that right now. And then verse 9. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And yeah, again, this is a moment where like this cry has been a 400-year cry. Yeah. And this is tough for us Americans to really grasp because there are nations that have been around for millennia now. And 400 years is the history of our nation chronologically, at least this version of this nation. And so we think of that probably a lot differently, but this has been misery 400 years. This has been the only thing in our history textbooks is misery, is crying out. And it's like probably this, oh man, it's about time you heard this, God, but also this relief of like, oh, finally, God. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got this passion lit up. We've got Moses awakening. We've got God saying, yes, all of your prayers are finally coming true, right? So I'm going to go back. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Yeah, right there with you, God. Mm-hmm. And then God says this. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt.
Man. He was pumping them up. And then baby bird gets kicked out of the nest. Boonk.
So we've got all these verses of Moses like fist pumping, cheering on God. And God's saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Yep. I have heard the cry.
And boop.
So now you go.
Yeah. Oof.
What are you thinking in this moment, Kyle?
Yeah. I mean, look, even when you're so charged up, right? And you know this resonates to your core. But oftentimes when it comes to conquering these things, and I think, micro aside, there's more people nowadays that never get to experience what it's like to truly slay your own dragon, right? Whatever that version is, right? Wow, so I digress. We can maybe come back to that. But, even if you haven't, think about what's going on inside your head. Picture yourself going up against, at the time, the world's most powerful ruler, and you're now being tasked with going and saving an entire people group with no army, with no resources, right? Yeah.
And your fugitive background, a warrant.
So your battle cry goes, yeah, ooh,
Me?
Yeah.
I thought you were saying you.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think you guys can understand
Mhm.
what might be going on in his head.
Yeah. And especially, Kyle and I are both parents of young kids, so I'm sorry if all of our analogies come back to that. But we'll hear about this God that brings about a renewed heart and patience. And, I think of the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control. Yes, God, that's what I want. And then I face my 9-year-old and it all flies out the window.
Yeah.
And then my 4-year-old, just words just seem to bounce off my 4-year-old. She doesn't even acknowledge me. And I'm no longer patient. And that's the so now go moment.
Yeah, you say pray for patience. You're gonna get more red lights. Pray for patience enough, you might just have some children. So
right? And so these things are all good in theory, and they're even good in prayer, and they're even better in theology.
Yep, just keeps on stacking.
And yet, there's going to be a moment with any of our dragons where God says, "So now go."
Yeah.
And this is going to have to become flesh now. And so the things that we get really amped up about, and really, and I mean this spiritually and in a good way.
Yeah.
That catch our attention, and I don't. It's become only ever more interesting to hear people's stories about how they first connected with God, or even how they continue to connect with God. I had a roommate once. I asked that question. It's like, how do you most connect with God? And he said, through laughter.
Oh man.
And that threw me for a loop. I was expecting prayer or studying the Bible. Right?
Worship.
yeah, exactly. Laughter, when he gets a full belly laugh on, he senses the fullness of the presence of God. And so what I'm getting at is, at some point there's this so now go moment that will have typically one of two responses. One is like, sure. And the other is Moses's.
Run away!
Which is this. So here's verse 11, which will actually be next episode.
Okay.
But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?"
Fair statement.
For all of us.
Yeah.
Who am I that what, God? You're asking.
Even if you're excited, you're still going to be like,
yes.
Sure about that?
Yes. So I want us to feel this on a couple levels, and we'll conclude the episode here, actually. So the first level is this part of the story here. Moses in Exodus 3, 1 through like 6 particularly, but also
Exodus.
like through 10. Exodus. Did I say Moses again?
No, you said Moses, so I put them together. Sorry.
That burning bush from earlier, some contact stuff. From Exodus 3, 1 through 6 is this actual recap of this story that we've played so far. There's a tree. It's apparently full of life because it's not burning up, but there's flames protecting it, and there's a test. Mm-hmm. We didn't go over that at the beginning of the episode. There's this test that Moses is going to experience, and he's either going to walk in the way of life as a result of that test, or feel the fire, right? Like, feel some sense of like death, or another way that we might build upon what was going on in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is walking away from the story, walking away from the invitation, rejecting the invitation. And so this is both a recap of everything from Genesis 1 up until Exodus, as well as a progression. Now we're going to see these ideas progress into what I continue to call identity and character.
Right.
And so that's what's going on in the first part of this. And then in the second part, we have this amazing alignment, maybe disalignment between our passions, the things that connect us with God, and our actions. And those things combined is our identity. Our identity can't just be wrapped up in our actions, because there's a whole other aspect of life. There's this consciousness stuff. There's this wellspring of life, right? But it also can't be just on the internal stuff, because our actions matter and they reveal that. And so the first invitation, I got ahead of myself a little bit, but the first invitation is this recap measure that says, when a tree of life moment, when a burning bush moment, when God in whatever form, be it a tree of life, a burning bush, blue jays, an angsty 9-year-old, an obstinate 4-year-old, moment in the car of silence, or maybe the loudness of the kids playing in the playroom.
Mm-hmm.
Will we take that moment and recall God is still present and turn aside? That's the first invitation. Will we turn aside both internally and actively?
Yeah.
The second invitation is, will we, and this is really going to be a hinge moment. So I'm going to throw this out there, and it's also going to be kind of what the rest of the invitations, the next 5 invitations, hold on to. But will we expect our identity in God to unfold and not simply be revealed?
Yeah.
And I'll give a little taste of that, and then Kyle, if you have other thoughts on what that means too, I'll let you have at it. But sometimes we think, oh, here's my story. I became a Christian in 4th grade when I accepted Jesus, and that's my identity now. And we actually don't mature all that much or change that much from that moment, other than we put a whole lot of weight into being a Christian.
Yeah.
And then, frankly, we just allow things to attach itself to that without a lot of thought or maturity. And I'm pointing the finger at myself. It took me a long while to realize this in myself.
Yeah.
And really what God says is an identity isn't just something that you pursue and achieve. It's something that gets ensued from being pursued by him.
Yeah.
And that, hopefully you hear that in what we just read today. God pursued Moses by lighting a bush on fire. Moses pursued God by saying, I wonder what this strange thing is. And turned aside and went towards it. And then God said, Moses, Moses, and pursued Moses a little further. And then Moses bowed and shielded his eyes, and in that sense pursued God a little further. And then God pursued Moses by saying, I hear the cry. I hear the cry of the oppressed, and I'm going to do this. So now you go. And there's Moses' opportunity to engage a little further, and we'll get into that in the next 5 episodes.
There you go. Nice little cliffhanger.
But this is the second invitation. So the first invitation is to turn aside. And then Kyle, the second invitation is to expect our identity not to just be revealed, but to ensue from being pursued by God. Thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Before I close this?
So many thoughts. So I think to me this comes back to story and the simple call of, if someone was going to view your story, would they continue to watch and grab the popcorn, or would they change the channel? Mm-hmm. Right? And so taking that route to be the main character is hard at times, but ultimately that's where the richness lies. And I think that any good story, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, right? You know, I think about like what's a good story, right? Like Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
You don't know. There's so many twists and turns, right? And so there's a pursuing from in this case multiple parties and forces from both ends. But the only way that it's unveiled is by continuing to press forward. Mm-hmm. At sometimes fast speed, sometimes a slow, struggling pace. The other thing, because I always like to search for those nuggets of application. So I'll take this one from the entrepreneurial world, but I really like what you said about faith, and so I'm going to try and land this one here. Okay,
go for it.
So there's a really cool entrepreneur, guy by the name of Richie Norton. And I think one of his several, but one of his books that I enjoyed recently was Anti-Time Management. And this guy was mentored by Stephen Covey, right? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? An absolute beast
staple
in the personal productivity world, right? And Richie got an opportunity to speak to Covey's team when he was like really young, like in his 20s. And, sitting across from Covey, Richie's like, well, what like, I don't have the experience to do this. And what Covey said to him really struck a chord with me. He said, some people have 1 year of experience 20 times versus 20 years of experience, right? So if we equate this into a faith journey, right? Did you accept the Lord as your personal savior and check the box and keep on living? And you have, let's say you've been a Christian for 10 years. Do you have 1 year of experience 10 times over? Or do you have 10 years of experience? And that on the entrepreneurial side was convicting for me, and just relit that passion for continuing to learn new skills, refine existing skills, push, drive, be curious. And I think the same thing comes back to our faith. Are we doing the Groundhog Day thing, or are we continuing to dive deeper? And I think it helps land the plane on a lot of this stuff, because if we truly want to be a main character in a story that people are gonna want to watch, you need to be plugged in, and you need to be moving forward every single day, even if it feels like you're moving backward, right? Good stories have their ups and downs. Got to keep pressing forward. And I'll speak for both of us when I say we believe in you. We appreciate that you're along with the journey, and we're excited what these next few episodes on Moses are going to do, because it ties into that foundational stuff.
That's right. Yeah, in so many great ways. I literally cannot wait, but I will wait to record the next 5 episodes. And I'll follow that up with, we do this pursuing because of the deep knowledge that we're being pursued.
Yeah.
And so if it's a pursuing in our own energy, in our own efforts, with our own goals, we will get tired and we will hit walls, and then we'll project that on the guy and say, oh, I hit a wall, this must not be it. But we have to remain open and curious.
Yeah, that's
right?
good.
And so the balance, and I don't mean that in a contrary way, but the balance really is, I do this because I know deeply in my bones I'm being pursued.
Yeah.
Right? And so one of my favorite identity verses in the Bible is Colossians 1:27. And it says, God has chosen to make known the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Which actually doesn't reveal anything. But mysteries in this ancient sense, I actually did a word study on this in a seminary class once, this word mystery. It is literally, it's not mystery in the sense of never revealed.
Right.
It's mystery in the sense of ever revealed.
Right.
That is this mystery that constantly unfolds.
Ever revealing.
Ever revealing, and yet ever mysterious. And honestly, I think even after we die, even in the age to come, that will still be true.
Right.
There will be endless riches to mine out of God, and every day in the kingdom will be one of surprise. Every day in the kingdom might have a moment like Moses, where it's like, what is that over there? And I don't know if we'll miss it in the age to come, but I don't want to miss it in this age.
Sure.
And that's what drives us.
Yeah.
That's the curiosity. That's the pursuing. That's the everyday opportunity to grow. Isn't because I've pursued it, but because I'm being pursued constantly by the hound of heaven, as C.S. Lewis puts it. And that is the mystery that he has placed in us, is this mystery of, and we don't get this anywhere else.
Right.
Baseball doesn't do it for me. Baseball lets me down, right? My wife, she's amazing. I love her dearly. There's letdown moments. But the mystery is that there's a love that pursues me constantly, perfectly, purely, every day. And that is unveiling itself and should cause me to want to pursue, to turn aside, to bow, to be amazed, and be challenged to my core, which is where the next 5 episodes will go. So we don't pursue our identity. It ensues from being pursued, capital P, pursued.
Yeah.
So if I may close, do you have anything to add there?
Let's wrap it up.
So the invitation is, may you foster a heart that turns aside to see what part of the mystery of Christ is being revealed in and through you each and every day. Thanks for listening to the Invitation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, kindly invite others, see what I did there, Kyle, to listen in by sharing it with a friend, posting about it on social media, or even leaving a rating and a review.
To catch all the latest and greatest, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X at The Invitation Pod. and help us share the invitation with others. Thanks again. We hope you'll tune in to future episodes.